And you see transhumanism and transgenderism both are more or less, predicted or they're precursors you can see in various UFO manifestations and close encounters, because the UFO aliens are very often androgynous, and certainly they're transhuman. I mean, if there's ever an interface of human, the human form and technology, like the Borg in Star Trek: The Next Generation, it's the UFO aliens. So they're presenting the template to us for transgenderism and transhumanism in order to deconstruct the human form.
We are pleased to bring you this long overdue interview with author Charles Upton that we recorded over a year ago. If you have the means and are so inclined, please consider donating to Mr. Upton's GoFundMe to assist with his battle with cancer. Find the link below. We apologize for the delay and hope you enjoy the interview. Welcome back to the Synaxis podcast. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Josh.
Today, we have a very special guest. It's Charles Upton. He is an author in the Traditionalist Perennialist School. He's got a wide array of books. We've talked about his Alien Disclosure Deception book on our podcast before. He's also written The System of Antichrist, Truth and Falsehood in Postmodernism and the New Age, The Science of the Greater Jihad, essays in Principial Psychology, and a bunch of other ones. Those are ones that stand out to me, though. And we are delighted to have you on. Thanks for coming on with us.
Well, glad to be here, or wherever I am. Sort of here and sort of not,
I mean, well, I guess we might as well jump into it. Today's topic is mostly on the UFO phenomenon. So, and you have a pretty unique take on it, and I just kind of I was wondering if maybe you could give us a quick rundown on what your perspective of the UFO phenomena is.
Well, the phenomenon has a number of basic aspects. It's clearly has an aspect in physical reality. I mean, UFOs appear on radar and they leave behind physical traces and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, like, they are what we would call really there, at least intermittently. Also, though, they have profound psychic effects. They change people's consciousness when they appear. People, have periods of lost time, and then later, you see a UFO, and later the aliens start walking through your walls at night, into your bedroom. So in other words, it's highly paranormal and psychic as well as physical, And thirdly, there are apparently deception efforts by human groups surrounding the UFO phenomenon. Sometimes, human deceptions of the Mission Impossible variety will attempt to imitate a UFO, appearance or alien encounters and things like this, which makes it very confusing for people to try to figure out, because people keep cycling back and forth. Well, I believe it. They're physical spaceships from other planets. Well, I believe they're physical, but they're actually uh, you know uh, clandestine military experiments, black ops, and things like that. Well, no, they're psychological, they're psychic, they're paranormal, but what are these human groups? See, and so ufology just goes in circles because they can't put all those pieces together. And how did I put those together? Well, if you guys want the best presentation of what I think the UFO beings are, there is a great video on YouTube by Mr. Mythos. Did you ever see anything by Mr. Mythos?
I think
Sounds
so.
familiar,
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, he's got one called that has the name of
Ultra terrestrials.
ultra terrestrials. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that does cover it. That pretty well shows these beings are what the Muslims call the jinn and what the Christians call the demons, who are very similar concepts, not exactly the same, but to all intents and purposes, the evil jinn are the demons.
Is that
So,
the same video where he's talking about Jacques Bally's
yeah.
research and how it's possibly like more spiritually evolved beings trying to lead us on some kind of evolution or something like that? Is that the
Well,
same?
I forget if that that is a belief that's floating around. They're trying to lead us, definitely trying to lead us, but I wouldn't call. Yeah, I mean, at one point, Jacques Vallée ran afoul of Whitley Strieber, and after he did that, he started. At least at one point, he was saying, "Well, these are the control system for evolution," which
Mhm.
is that's what those beings want to make us believe. That's not what they are.
I
What
think
they
one of the
are.
more Oh, sorry. I think one of the more recent interviews with Valet, he says something like that it's some kind of intelligence trying to guide us, maybe to help our evolution.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in earlier years he knew better. And it was not probably not just the influence of Strieber, but that's when I started to see that he was starting to talk like that. Strieber is weird. These beings came and literally raped him. You know,
Yeah.
I was interviewed by Strieber, and I mean, if beings had treated me the way they treated Strieber, I would say these dudes are evil. And, I at least, the very least, want to protect myself from them and never see them again. And if I ever have a chance to get back at them, I will do it. I mean, and it's an abnormal response to say, well, it was horrible, but since it comes from an unknown direction, it must be spiritual, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And this is the fruits of materialism. We've been, had a materialist paradigm for so long that denied any reality from any unseen dimension, that when that appears, they say, "Wow, this changes everything. This must be the equivalent of God or something," because, ooh, how could that happen? Whereas if you have a normal religious education, which is getting rarer all the time now, you'll know, you God is real, the angelic world is real, and also the demonic world is real, or the jinnish world is real, and you'll be able to distinguish between them. And that's sort of kindergarten level understanding of somebody of people in more religious ages. But after materialism, you know, and these beings understand very well that since we become so materialistic, they could now present themselves as angels, gods, or whatever they wished, because we didn't have the criteria to discern. We didn't have discernment of spirits anymore. We couldn't, say, well, obviously these are the demons, not the angels. We couldn't say that because we were naive after centuries of materialism. So, but generally speaking, I think that intraterrestrial thing is really good, by Mr. Mythos, because it shows how these beings are much more likely to be uh, a class of beings who can temporarily materialize and then go up in smoke, than anything like astronauts from other planets, which is sort of the least likely explanation for what they are. I mean, straight science, if there is such a thing as straight science anymore, and not simply science fiction that's well funded and operating in the universities, uh, you know, talks about how difficult it would be for anybody to get here from another planet. Um, the then of course they start to speculate. Well, they used subspace or interdimensionality and all of that, and try to figure that out with advanced cutting edge physics, which can maybe see a little bit into that world. Because if those beings interface between their world and our material world, at the point of interface, maybe advanced physics can speculate or have something real to say about what that's like. I mean, but physics can't talk about what they are in themselves and in their world because it doesn't look at things that way. It's not designed to do that, you know. So, but that's I think that if you want something that proves these are not alien astronauts, but they are some kind of paranormal beings, then the Mr. Mythos video is the best thing you're going to find, I think. So.
Nice. Yeah. I'll have to watch that again. It's not super, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I guess something that's I'm wondering about after you say all that stuff is how you said that a sort of elementary religious understanding, if somebody has that, they would be able to recognize the demonic nature of these things.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to how exactly we can see that.
Well, okay. Professor John Mack of Harvard, Harvard psychiatrist, I think, who he won a Pulitzer Prize writing a book on T.E. Lawrence, and he liked to present himself as somehow, related to the intelligence community in terms of heroic individualistic cowboy diplomacy. I forget what his self-description was, but he's not just a psychiatrist. Well, he passed on some years ago. He wrote a very revealing book called Abduction. I forget the subtitle, but he took 100 cases of so-called alien abductions and studied them. These were his clients as a psychiatrist, and studied them directly. And although a lot of what he presents is, well, here are the new paradigms and new, embryonic religions and belief systems presented by the aliens, the quote aliens. But essentially, he says these effects are almost universally toxic upon human beings. They're very destructive. They create physical illnesses, mental illnesses. They cause the breakup of marriages. They're just, the long list of terrible effects. And he says, even when there are spontaneous physical healings, you still have these negative effects. And I got that list, and then I was looking around on the web in the annals of Catholic exorcism, and I found a list of what demonic obsession is supposed to do to people, and they were nearly identical. It's the same thing. These are simply demons presenting themselves as space aliens because they know they can get away with it, at least for now. So
yeah, I remember you wrote about John Mack, and I think he had a similar view to what we kind of described that Jacques Vallée had, that these were these more evolved beings that were beyond good and evil that could teach us something about ourselves. And you wrote about like the 8-step transformational process.
Yeah. I mean that's right. So many, and all of these things have a grain of truth, but that's why they're so dangerous, because I mean every heresy in Christian terms wouldn't be a dangerous heresy if it didn't have a grain of truth, but these are profound misdirections. I think what's happened, we are in truly eschatological times. Now, I'm a Muslim, and what Muslims believe is that at the end of this age, the prophet Jesus will return to slay Al-Dajjal, who is the Antichrist. And, this is certainly not identical to, but analogous to and more or less in line with the Christian view of the Parousia. This is the times we're in, I believe. And I think that these beings are coming to divert our attention from that emerging reality. They don't want us to look in that direction. They want us to look to them and worship them instead. So we will, not be ready So in other words, they have come to interrupt and subvert the katachon. That's why they're here, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. And there are an awful lot of governmental agencies and extra governmental power groups, think tanks, foundations, and stuff who are involved in the creation right now of a UFO religion, of like a literal, because when paganism comes back, this is how it comes back. You think, well, these little pagan groups, dancing around in the woods, are they going to have any real effect? Well, they do have an effect because they're, once you get TikTok or something, any one of those can go viral. So they do have that effect. But in terms of actual manifestations, which have, let's say miraculous manifestations, which have always been a part of religion, that's what the UFO aliens are providing. Look, we're real. We appear on radar. And so this is how paganism comes back to try to block. I mean, it's like when King Herod, slaughtered the innocents. You try to prevent, the first incarnation, the first coming of Christ. Prevent it. Kill all the children. Well, and this is an attempt to prevent, which they will not be able to do, the parousia, the return of Christ. It's simply what they are able to do is take our attention off that. So we will miss it and we will not have the right relationship to it. And we will be found worshiping false gods,
Mhm.
So
And these forces, like governmental and spiritual, that you just described, it seems that maybe those are bound up with this idea of the counter initiation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
well, yeah, that's a story of a term by René Guénon. Let me I found just before I connected with you guys, I found something that I remembered. Let's see if I can get this. Okay, this is something. There's a William Sims Bainbridge, who I believe is still alive. He's an early transhumanist. And way back in 1981, he presented this paper, this talk at, let's see, at the 19th Goddard Memorial Symposium of the American Astronautical Society, Pentagon City, Virginia. So he was presenting this at the Pentagon, okay? And it's called Religions for a Galactic Civilization by William Sims Bainbridge.
Ah.
And let me find the right paragraph here. So even back then, there was research and development by very high level, government connected people, because his resume, he's up there with the true ruling elites of this country. He's not a a crazy UFO cultist. Space religions. Let me look for it.
That reminds me of Changing Images of Man. It was I think it came out in the 70s, and it was SRI Institute. And it was, it studied human religions and cultures and the axioms that they held and what they should think about the world based on the things that they held. So they studied it in an attempt to be able to psyop a new worldview.
Yeah, well, and they are doing that. That is happening, and I think that the UFO religion has become, the standard bearer of that whole effort at this point, because it can point to phenomena, and it can, the representatives of it can be be invited to congressional hearings. So this is what the center of that right now. So let me see here. Just a minute. Space religion. Yeah, so he says, these flying saucer cults are all quite insignificant, but one like them could well rise to prominence in a future decade. We need several really aggressive, attractive space religions, meeting the emotional needs of different segments of our population, driving traditional religions and retrograde cults from the field. You know,
Wow.
no more Eastern Orthodox Christianity, no more traditional Islam, you know, because, we're just in these retrograde cults that believes in all this old-fashioned stuff.
Mhm.
We need, and retrograde cults from the field. New cults tend not to be very creative, but draw their practices and doctrines from other groups and traditions. If they are to get galactic visions, the best source is probably science fiction. Not only does science fiction offer the grand images of galactic civilizations and the specific notions of how to achieve them, but it is drenched in occult and pseudoscientific ideas which might well serve people's religious needs if packaged in new churches. Now, there he comes out with it, right? And wow.
What year did you say that was from again?
1981.
81. Okay.
So, it's been 40, how many years? Um, but and that's coming along.
Yeah.
Uh, so the idea it starts with the idea of a new religion that can unify the world, and some people believe will bring world peace because of unity. I mean, unity, only God is one. This world is many. That's why it's here. If it wasn't many, it wouldn't be here. You can't have any real unity in this world, only an imposed artificial unity, which is what I believe the Tower of Babel was all about, for political purpose, or an imposed religious unity for a political purpose. And God said, sorry, you're not allowed to do that. And then the real multiplicity and divergence of different religions became revealed, in the confusion of tongues. So, well, that's what they want to do.
I think you're right about that. There really is those ideas of space brothers, and I know that's been around for a long time. But I remember going to Burning Man like 7 or 8 years ago when I was really into that, and there's just tents of people channeling entities, and you'll just meet people who try to tell you about the Galactic Federation of Light and the Pleiadians, and it seems to
Uh-huh.
be really common with the more New Age circles.
Oh yeah, it is, and I think that's emerging as what is like going to be the dominant theme in what is left of the New Age. I mean, the New Age isn't a mass popular movement like it was like in the 80s and 90s, but it's become much more entrenched in the elites, and from there it's spreading on a popular level again, but with definitely more of an elite twist than the first time around. So why do they want this religion? Well, it's supposed to bring world peace. It's certainly going to, they hope to bring world hegemony to control all of us. Um, and even if a one world religion seems less likely now with all of the polarization and conflict in the world, at least the attempt to create a one world religion has had a terribly destructive effect on the traditional faiths. I mean, um, once you start to think of your own religion as a part of the truth, which is all very well, but needs the other parts to have a complete picture, then you've lost your faith, you know? And that's what they want. They want to control religion because they realize religion has always, I mean, why would they want billions of people to take uh the basic worldview and their moral imperatives from religious organizations that they don't control? That's intolerable. Sorry, we got to get rid of that. We either got to take them over, which, like the Catholic Church, has largely been taken over, or we get rid of them, and that's what they're up to. But so this is on one level. In one level, this is just psycho geopolitics, right? Uh, people, ideas of how to rule the world. But I believe that there's you might say, an esoteric core of people in this whole movement who recognize the reality of these beings that they are in contact with, and are becoming more and more conscious Satanists. They're starting to know that these are the demons, and they're starting to throw in their lot with the demons. And and we see this when, this is the time when Satanism is coming out of the closet and becoming much more prevalent. And now, a lot of Satanism just says, well, we don't literally believe in Satan. Satan is just a symbol of, of good old human selfishness. And if everybody was just selfish and did what they want, then everybody would be happy. Oh, yeah. Okay. But really, a lot of them know that they are dealing with invisible entities who are real and who have been able to give them power in a circumscribed way. And, we're getting closer and closer to that coming right out in the open. And I think a lot of the people who are, in governmental or extra-governmental circles who are purveying the UFO religion, some of them really do know that they're worshiping demons.
Can you give us any examples of somebody who's consciously satanic in that way?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you would consider like Michael Aquino, the guy who started the Temple of Set.
Yeah.
Well, certainly, I don't know how much Aquino talked about aliens, but certainly, yeah, he was a conscious. What he was in Anton LaVey's was it Church of Satan, but he was too evil for that, so he had to go off and his own Temple of Set. Yeah, he's one. I mean, I don't know all the names of the present rogues gallery, but they're there. And
I was thinking about maybe Peter Levenda,
Peter
he's like a
Levenda, I mean, it's interesting. Peter Levenda has real insight into a lot of stuff. I mean, but he has never renounced the magical paradigm. I've seen lectures by him where above his head is a picture of the entity Lamb, which was channeled by Aleister Crowley. And this is an interesting line here. Definitely a Satanist. At one point, he was doing something called the Amalantro workings, and he channeled a being called Lamb, which Lamb described himself as a collective being, very much as when Jesus, was casting the demons out of the lone demoniac, and he asked, he says, well, what is your name? Which is very common in exorcism. Find the demon's name, you will have power over him or her, supposedly. And they said, well, our name is Legion, for we are many. So Lamb being a collective being like that. And the picture of Lamb is very much, a lot of people see in that our first image of what has later become the alien gray, which was popularized pretty much by Whitley Strieber. So, okay, so Crowley, two of his students were L. Ron Hubbard, who founded the Church of Scientology, who was a science fiction writer, by the way, and the other was Jack Parsons, who, was a rocket scientist who co-founded the Aerojet Corporation and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who had a crater named after him on the dark side of the moon, the Parsons Crater. So he's very much in with the elites of his nation. But at the same time, he was a pagan. He did pagan rituals at his rocket launchings. He said that his lifetime mission was to destroy Christianity. And somewhere on the web, if it's still there, that there's video which shows him. It's an old film of apparently he rented a hall and did a demonic invocation, for evocation, I should say, for the for the audience. You can hear the audience in the background. He's got this box, this with wires and stuff, and he said, "Well, this is like an electronic Ouija board, and through this we can contact demons. This is how we invoke demons."
Mm.
Which is plausible because when UFOs fly over, UFOs are well known to have electronic, to affect electronic equipment, or they'll fly over and the car engine will die, or they'll affect. And this is also said of demons. People are talking on the phone about demons, and then suddenly the phone call drops, or all this static comes in, and it's very common. It's getting to be people say, "Oh yeah, that's just them," and so that's what they do, and so he was actually, this was something called the Babylon workings, which Parsons was doing, invoking his female demon Babylon, Babalon, and he was working through this electronic Ouija board and doing this publicly. So you can find this on the web. So here you have the direct connection between the emerging technocracy, the global elites, major aerospace corporations, and Satanism right there. And this has been going on for a long time. It's just so implausible to people that they don't wake up to it. So,
Do you think there's a lot more people in the government who are kind of just useful dupes, like Tom DeLonge, who maybe have stuff fed to them by CIA agents, and rather than they're maliciously trying to bring in a counter initiation?
I think Tom DeLonge is pretty malicious himself. I do.
Hmm.
But I may be wrong. Or another one is Stephen Greer. There's Stephen Greer, and there's some other group. Both Stephen Greer has some app that you can put in on your phone, which lets you contact UFO aliens.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's teaching methods for mass demonic invocation, sort of a spiritualist kind of thing. And he's teaching that to many, many, many people. Let's all invoke them. Let's all be black magicians. He's not saying that's what they are, but he and then things like that get on TikTok, and you have, 70,000 teenage girls invoking UFO aliens who are actually demons. I mean, this is pretty serious.
Yeah.
This is as serious as it could get.
Yeah, I think you wrote about that goes back a good long time, back to like the spiritualist movement. I think you mentioned in, I think, René Guénon's book that some of the spirits that were being contacted by the early spiritualists were saying that they were from outer space or
Yeah,
something.
these we are your friends from space.
Yeah.
In other words, the early space brothers. Yeah. So anyway, if you ask about the counter initiation, René Guénon wrote a great book called The Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times, which everybody ought to read. And Guenon very quickly was, he was basically raised a Catholic, but he felt that something was missing in the Catholic Church, the esoteric dimension, whatever. And so he looked for it in every occult organization that apparently that was available to him during the time, mostly between the two world wars. And he went through all these groups, and he came out the other side and says, these groups aren't just, aren't just crazy people. I mean, the crazy people, who invent fantasy religions, he called the pseudo initiation. He said somewhere in there, though, we have a counter initiation. We have conscious Satanists who are working to subvert and invert real esoteric organizations. Now, a lot of people in the Christian and even the Muslim world will not believe that there are real esoteric organizations that are in line with the will of God. They will look at all esotericism as merely occultism. And I don't agree with that because, in Islam, we have, the Sufi tariqas who are true spiritual brotherhoods. Some of them have become subverted. have gone off the deep end or become, succumbed to the attractions of the dark side. But by and large, they are esoteric. I mean, they are Orthodox Muslims, whether or not the non-Sufi Muslims always recognize them as that. That's what they are. And it's within Christianity, the, the separate esoteric groups are not as well defined. But certainly, hesychasm could be considered something more or less analogous to in Christianity to Sufism in Islam. The practices are very similar. The relationship, I mean, Sufi tariqas had their sheikhs, and hesychasts have their garon or their starets. All three words mean elder, exactly the same concept and exactly the same function. And the practice in Sufism is pretty much zikrullah, which means remembrance of God, just as in Eastern Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodox hesychasm, the main practice is mnimi theou, which means remembrance of God. And, the Jesus prayer and the Sufi zikr are strictly analogous. So, some deep similarities. So there are, what could be called esoteric groups, which are entirely orthodox and in line with divine revelations. But a lot of these groups, sometimes they go wrong. Sometimes they go over to the dark side. To just do a little side issue here about the Knights Templars, which I would think that Eastern Orthodox people would not very much appreciate them, given what the Crusaders, did to Eastern Orthodox Christianity, considering it to be almost as much of a heresy as Islam, doing terrible damage. I don't think the Muslims would have ever conquered Byzantium if it hadn't first been weakened by the Templars. I mean by the Crusaders. But somewhere along the line, the Templars, when they were in the Holy Land, they occupied the Temple Mount. And, and there was the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Masjid. And there are accounts that they did do some repairs to these buildings. And what this would indicate is, I mean, who would they hire to repair these buildings? They were not masons themselves or builders. They would hire some locals, and they wouldn't just put out a call, they would call for bids and take the lowest bidder. They would find the people who were tasked with maintaining these buildings, who are undoubtedly brotherhoods who consider themselves to have a sacred function, because these are very holy sites. So they found the masons who helped them repair these buildings. And some people think that those masons were a Sufi or quasi-Sufi group called Al-Bana, who means the builders. Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. In any case, it stands to reason they would have found people like this. And then they apparently took some of them to the West with them when they went back, after which the Gothic arch started to appear in Western architecture, whose first appearance was within the Al-Aqsa Masjid on the Temple Mount. And they would build octagonal churches sometimes, which would be reminiscent of the Dome of the Rock. So it seems like they took some of these craftsmen with them back to the West. And I think these are the people who became the ancestors of the Freemasons. Now, the problem with that is that the Freemasons, Sufi orders will always tend to think, especially when they've been misunderstood and oppressed by the other Muslims, well, hey, we don't need those Muslims. We don't need the Sharia. We can do our own thing. We have our own mysteries and our own practices, and we can be our own thing, which is not true. Sufism is only valid within the context of Islam. Could hesychasm leave Eastern Orthodoxy and become a New Age cult unto itself? Maybe it has, for all I know, but that's not going to be a valid thing, you know? And so when those Masons went to the West and started to operate within the context of Christianity, not Islam, even though they might have had a great influence on the creation of the Western Gothic cathedrals, you know, which are very beautiful creations. They ended up being subversive and finally anti-clerical, you know, anti-religious, because they were outside of their proper matrix. That's what I think happened with the Templars. Anyway, so René Guénon said there's such a thing as a counter-initiation. There are true spiritual groups, but there are deeply destructive, essentially satanic groups who have a great amount of esoteric knowledge of a kind. You know, it is often said that you know, Satan studied metaphysics for 6,000 years until he got very good at it. And so, you know, their function is to destroy, you know, the esoteric groups, you know, the who at their best are the deepest, you know, although hidden relationship between the human race and God. Those have to be destroyed. And so the counter initiation comes forward to subvert them. And I think the counter initiation has got a big foothold in the global elites of today. And if you look for it, you'll see it everywhere. I mean, it's coming out of the woodwork. In Guénon's time, he only saw these, you know, these peripheral strange groups that he'd run across. And although he did say once in a while, oh, like he talked about how the Theosophical Society was actually an arm of British colonialism in India. You know, he didn't understand that there was a geopolitical aspect to these groups, but that aspect has really expanded in our time. Just look for it, and you will see it everywhere. So,
Something I find myself wondering is what, in your view, distinguishes a valid tradition from an invalid or subverted one?
a valid tradition comes from a divine revelation. And, you know, there's always going to be disagreement on what is a divine revelation, you know, and you can't just avoid that disagreement. But according to the perennialists, and I just want to say, you know, you're right to identify with me with a traditionalist perennialist school, but I have difficulties with them too, because I see a certain amount of subversion operating in that world as well, as is understandable in times like this, because there's subversion at every point, everywhere. So, you know, in a certain sense, no blame or no special blame to them. Just, you know, you got to watch out for dark tendencies everywhere. But so yeah, ask me that question again.
What, in your view, distinguishes a valid tradition from an invalid or subverted one?
Yeah, well, a true tradition has to come from a divine revelation. In Christianity, the revelation is Christ. In Judaism, it's Torah, which began on Mount Sinai with Moses. In Islam, it's when the Quran came to the Prophet Muhammad when he was meditating and praying in a cave on Mount Hira, there it came. They always come, it seems, almost at one moment. Then later on, they're elaborated, and later on, they slowly degenerate. But that's what a true revelation is. Now, what is the subversion of it? Well, it's one of the aspects of the subversion is a Promethean tendency, which means the idea that you can attain, you know, spiritual enlightenment and union with God through a kind of exploit, through your own efforts. You know, as Prometheus stole fire from Zeus, And this is never the case. You were always the servant and always in need of God's help. And once in for example, years ago, a lot of years ago, I was involved with Kundalini yoga, as was taught by Yogi Bhajan to the hippies. He came to the hippies and said, "Hippies, listen up. You want to get high without drugs? Try breath of fire. It'll knock your socks off." And it did knock my socks off. Uh, that there's awakening the psychophysical powers within the human system, to rise through the chakras and bring enlightenment. That's all very well, but it has to be in response to grace. Grace comes unmerited, perhaps not unasked, but unmerited from God. It's a free gift. And in response to that, spiritual development, inner transformation takes place. And perhaps you would say the Kundalini rises, which is kind of what happened in Pentecost. And there was a rushing mighty wind that, came to the apostles and the Virgin Mary, in their upper room. And in response to that, cloven tongues of fire appeared above their heads, which is very much like the Kundalini rising to energize the Sahasrara, the crown chakra. Okay, but it's in response to grace. You don't do it yourself to try to get there. And that is one of the signs of subversion. And then somehow, once you take that step, well, I can reach God on my own, then everything else follows, which is, maybe I can get God to do what I want, or maybe I can get the help of spiritual intermediaries to make God do what I want, and I'll end up worshiping angels, and finally you end up worshiping demons. It goes to hell by a number of steps, but those, it starts with self-will. Self-will can invent a whole religion, both exoteric and esoteric, that's just like so close to the real thing, except it's perverted at the root because it's based on self-will, not upon submission to the will of God. So that's it.
That reminds me, recently I was listening to an interview with someone who considers themselves a follower of Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah.
And the interviewer said something about like, well, he wasn't really Christian, so Christians don't really trust him very much. And this person said, oh, I disagree. He was a Christian because he had an experience of Christ, and Christians don't like him because he is involved in certain elements of occultism. But it was this person's opinion that his occultism was used for good. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, Steiner was better than the Theosophists, but that's not saying much. I don't know. I wish I knew more about Steiner, but whenever I hear, I just recently heard a YouTube video on Rosicrucianism, which I identify as having a lot of doctrines taken from Steiner, like the difference between Lucifer and Ahriman, and that's one of Steiner's themes. And I was just listening to that and I said, man, once again, certain elements of truth, but so much error, so much distortion. So I generally don't trust Steiner, and if I understand correctly, and I may not, there are a number of teachers of different kinds, from different directions, who believe in what I call the spiritual evolution of the macrocosm. These would include philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, whose philosophy became influential in the modernist process theology in Christianity. Hegel was one who believed that history was a dialectical process of God trying to understand himself. As if he doesn't understand himself from all eternity, he doesn't deserve the name of God, in my opinion. Another one was Teilhard de Chardin, who talks about everything is evolving toward the omega point and all of this. Another one was Sri Aurobindo in Hinduism, who believed that, he made a synthesis between Hindu doctrine and a basic spiritual evolutionary sense that he was getting more or less from the West. And Steiner is another, and they're wrong. The macrocosm does not evolve toward God. God manifests the universe, the macrocosm, and it's the center of the macrocosm, which is the human microcosm. We are the epitome of divine manifestation in a single form. That's why Christ incarnated as a human being, not as a cow or a rock or something else, because we have that central place. And it is manifest, and then in a particular cycle of manifestation, the macrocosm, the totality of outward manifestation, undergoes an entropic process. It goes downhill. This is basic Hinduism with the doctrine of the four yugas, each one of which is shorter and more constricted. And now we're in the Kali Yuga, which is the worst, because things go downhill. And they go downhill to an apocalypse when the old, heaven and earth are swept away and a new heaven and earth come at one time. We don't evolve toward the heavenly Jerusalem. The old world is burned and the heavenly Jerusalem arrives. That's the truth, generally speaking. And also in the Quran, and you have and in the Puranas in Hinduism, you have the story of the degeneration of the world and humanity, as we get near the end of the age. That's the real thing. And people don't like that.
Yeah.
Apocalypse is a little heavy for people to face. And so they said, well, maybe it's all, just the darkness before the dawn, and we're really getting better all the time, And then that's the new age impulse of saying, but really it's just about to get better. It only looks so bad because it's not so bad, and how long can you believe that, right? That's not it.
Yeah, some of the things that you've written about those early Hindu prophecies of the Kali Yuga, and how trust in institutions will degrade, and even like male and female will be blurred together, and all of these different things. It definitely seems to be coming to fruition in that sense. And that also seems to tie back to what we were talking about with John Mack, because you made some observations about his sort of eightfold path of alien enlightenment, where they use like the fear of climate destruction, and they even have people mutilate themselves, and you seem to come to this conclusion that what they're trying to do is destroy the human form itself.
They're trying to deconstruct the human form, because the human form is the image of God on earth, and they don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And you see transhumanism and transgenderism both are more or less predicted, or they're precursors, you can see in various UFO manifestations and close encounters, because the UFO aliens are very often androgynous, and certainly they're transhuman. I mean, if there's ever an interface of human, the human form and technology, like the Borg in Star Trek: The Next Generation, it's the UFO aliens. So they're presenting the template to us for transgenderism and transhumanism in order to deconstruct the human form. Now, my theory is, now this is a theory, and I call it a myth because I can't point to a definite traditional doctrine which says this, although it's suggested in a lot of places, was that the jinn were intermediary plane beings who have the power to materialize temporarily, and they're lower than the angels, but they're more subtle than the human race. A lot of them are indistinguishable from the Christian demons. Some of them are in Islam are considered to be Muslims who worship Allah, and actually some are considered to be, they're thought to be Christian jinn who worship Christ, and Jewish jinn who worship, follow the prophet Moses. But generally speaking, they're pretty much demonic in their manifestation. And I believe that these beings, or let's say I posit that these beings possessed in an earlier world age what is called the amana in the Quran. Now, the Quran says, behold, we offered the trust, which is in Arabic amana, and we is Allah, we offered the trust to the heavens, the earth, and the hills, but that they shrank away from it and were afraid of it, and man assumed it. Then it says, lo, he hath proved a tyrant and a fool, which is true. But the trust is essentially, the stewardship of humanity over terrestrial existence, as the representative of God, which is certainly alluded to in the book, in Genesis. We are the stewards of God's creation. That's the amana. Well, what if these jinn had the amana in an earlier age before humanity came, and did something terrible and lost it, and it passed to the human race? There's the other story from the Quran is Allah teaches, this is Allah and Adam in the world before this world, before humanity became established on earth. So this is the archetype of humanity in a higher world. So Allah tells Adam the names of all things, and which are apparently also the names of the angels, since the angels are in one sense the archetypes of all forms in universal manifestation. They all have their angelic aspect. The angels are the archetypes of the stars, the planets, the seas, and whatever. So he told Adam the names of all things, and then he asked the angels, well, do you know these names? And they said, no, far be it from us. We don't know. You're the one who knows. We don't know. And so Allah commanded Adam to tell them their names, to tell the angels their own names. They did not know them. So that this shows that in potential, the human being has precedence even over the angelic worlds, just as Christ, who is the perfect man and the archetype of humanity within God, just as he has precedence over all the other beings because of the centrality of the human form. So he said then, okay, he commanded all the angels to bow down to Adam, and they did, because he had precedence. He had proved that he had precedence. He knew their names. They didn't even know their own names. So he had precedence. They bowed down to him, all except one, who was Iblis, who is the Muslim Satan. Iblis was a jinn who had been admitted to the ranks of the angels. Interestingly enough, just like Loki in Norse mythology was a giant, or one of the Jotun, who had been admitted to the ranks of the gods, the Aesir. Same idea. So, but he was a jinn. He said, well, I'm not, he said, far be it from me to bow down to Adam, a being made of the mud of the earth, whereas I am a being made of smokeless fire. And so Allah said, very well, you lost it. You're out of heaven. And Iblis says, well, don't send me to the fire right away. Give me time to screw up your creation, and because I can do it. I swear I can do it. And Allah says, okay, you're given your chance. You know what'll eventually happen to you, but you're given your chance for a time. to see if you can tempt humanity and mess with my creation, and that's when Iblis became what we consider to be Satan, or in Arabic shaitan. So, but it's as if the reason Iblis refused to bow down to Adam is that Allah had brought Adam forward and said, okay, you jinn, you've lost the amana, you lost the trust, you screwed up. Here's the new boss. He's going to be my representative on terrestrial existence now, and you're out of a job. And of course, Iblis did not like that, right? It's it's exactly like that. Now I don't know who claims that. I'm calling this a myth because this is something I'm putting together from different sources, and I can't claim it as authoritative. But it's very interesting to me that something like that might have happened. If that is true, then the jinn, appearing as the UFO aliens, are working now to deconstruct the human form through transgenderism, transhumanism, or whatever else, or through this alien-human hybridization project, in which they say, well, just accept a little alien DNA, and this is the only way you can survive the apocalypse, is to become half jinn, okay? But we're only here to help, right? We don't want you to see you wiped out. So we're going to help you by making you half jinn so you won't survive. All these, deceptions, incredible deceptions. They want to deconstruct the human form because they foolishly think that if we lose the human form, which means we will lose the amana, we will lose the trust, we will no longer be God's chosen representatives on earth, then that function will pass back to them and they'll regain their earlier glory. That's what some of them think. And I'll tell them right now, if any of them are listening, you guys are wrong. That's not going to happen. Even if you are able to destroy humanity, that does not mean you will be reestablished in our place. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about there. And it does seem to line up with, obviously, a lot of the Christian theology of Satan's envy of man as the crown of creation.
Exactly.
Where do we go from there? Do you have something?
Would you have any practical takeaways or steps for someone who might be hearing this, who maybe is struck with some kind of pessimism or not feeling optimistic? What advice would you give to people?
Well, depends upon whether or not you believe in God. If you believe in God, you will know that God will ultimately triumph and has triumphed and is triumphing in this moment. And all the things I've said have no ultimate effect on him and do not necessarily have to have an effect upon our relationship to him. Although they do, because, this world is pretty formidable and hard right now, and people are under terrible stress and tend to lose faith and tend to become terrified and run into all sorts of distractions or a way to get away from the terror. Well, we can't really get away. I mean, if you have a real way, a real method of prayer, I mean, prayer is the answer. Prayer is the answer. How do you pray? I don't know. People have different methods, different approaches. But, God is real. He is as real as the next breath you're taking. And if we can turn our attention purely to him, and say, actually, somewhere this is in the Quran, that there's a couple of the last two surahs of the Quran. I wish I had them in front of me. It may take too long to find them. But, one says, In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, say, I seek refuge in the Lord of daybreak from the evil of that which he created, from the evil of the darkness when it is intense, and from the evil of malignant witchcraft, and from the evil of the envier when he envieth. Now, malignant witchcraft is literally women who blow upon knots, which is apparently some form of witchcraft that was operating in his time and maybe still today. And the envier is shaitan, is Iblis. He envies us, right? Isn't that what Christians say about Satan and his demons? They envy the human race. So you turn to Allah and ask for protection from that. Turn to God in whatever form your faith appears. And the last surah of the Quran, which I may not have memorized, is directly a prayer not to lose the human form, a prayer for the maintenance of the human form. It says, in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, say, I take refuge.
Is it this one that you ended your essay with that you sent me?
Yeah, that's where it is. Let me read it. Yeah, I got that right here. Give me a second.
Okay.
Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, that's it. This is, it's interesting. The last surah of the Quran is against all the stuff I'm talking about. Don't lose the human form, as if, Allah and his prophet realized all those centuries ago that this would be the ultimate temptation, right? Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the King of mankind, the God of mankind, from the evil of the sneaking whisperer who whispereth in the hearts of mankind, of the jinn and of mankind. Now, and what is the whisper? What is being whispered? Reject the human form. The human form is shot. Reject the human form, and fly with the fairies. Through the moonlit night. And then you'll be okay.
You shall be as gods.
Yeah, you shall be as gods, or at least you'll survive in some form, because everything's going to be destroyed, but you'll be able to survive, if you stick with us in some way, and that's not it. We have to meet whatever we meet, our personal death, and even the apocalypse and the end of this world. We have to meet that in our full human form. That's the whole idea. That's what the human race is for, and that will be the apotheosis of the human form. In a certain sense, that will be our greatest hour, even though it's our most terrible hour, if we do not reject our humanity in the face of the terror of the world as it appears today. So.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's a good place to start wrapping it up. We're at about an hour. I'm really glad you joined us for this. I'm wondering, do you have any projects in the works that are coming up?
Oh, yeah. I'm doing a bunch of, I'm not a ufologist, basically. That's one of the things I did, because I needed to get that straight. Well, I just finished writing my autobiography, strangely enough. My Sufi brothers said, you got to write, because I kept telling all these old stories. Oh, yeah, I met Allen Ginsberg and I'm blah, blah, all this stuff, stuff I used to do. And it's interesting to show somebody coming who grew up in a pre-Vatican II traditional Catholic church in California. And then the hippies came, and then, the New Age came, and a bunch of different and leftist politics and the peace movement and all this, and then liberation theology, okay, and then the Traditionalist School came, and just see, and finally we ended up with the last big thing I was involved in like that was the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the world. The Prophet had the greatest respect for Christianity, and he produced these covenants or treaties with various Christian groups of his time. The first was with the monastery of St. Catherine's in Sinai, Eastern Orthodox. And according to the research of my colleague, Dr. John Andrew Morrow, and this is actually what is continually told by the monks of St. Catherine's. And if you want to contact them and ask them if this is true, you can do it. That they recognized his prophethood, which is pretty heavy from an Eastern Orthodox standpoint and a little dangerous to talk about. But apparently they did, according to the story they tells, and also it's told by the Bedouins of the Sinai. And so the prophet originally wanted to create a kind of federation of the peoples of the book, the Christians, whatever his group was becoming to be, who were going to become the Muslims, and whatever Jews who would go along, a lot of which didn't. And anybody, he's basically, is it Gospel of Matthew, Jesus said, he who is not against us is for us. That was pretty much the prophet's original attitude. And he created a political entity in Medina by the Constitution of Medina that enshrined these principles, which did not last very long. Then polarization happened, schism happened within Islam between the Shia and the Sunni, because as Islam expanded, it came into conflict with the Byzantine Empire, although the prophet and his later followers reached out to a lot of the Christian groups on the edges of the empire who didn't particularly like, to be taxed and by the Byzantines, and at the same time be considered to be relatively heretical, and this, and made treaties with them. In fact, when Umar occupied Jerusalem, as the Muslims first came into Jerusalem, they looked around and they said, well, who are the real Christians here? Who because we want to give Christians, a Christian group control, over the Christian sacred sites. So who do we go to? We can't go to the Eastern Orthodox because we're in conflict with them. But so is there another group? So who they found was the Armenians. The Armenian Orthodox, they said these must be the real Christians because they venerate St. James the Greater, and they actually possess his relics. So these must be the real Christians. So they made the Armenian Christians, the Sharifs, if you will, the guardians of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the different sacred sites in the Holy Land. And that some of that is still in operation today. They're one of the groups who are still, guardians of those sites. So that's how close, and with the treaty that the prophet himself made with St. Catherine's Monastery, that's how close Islam and Christianity were. They were never identical, but they were an awful close. And that didn't work out too well historically. The covenants say that every Muslim until the end of time must vow never to, kill or oppress or overly tax or damage the buildings of any Christian group, or they must not even prevent their Christian wives from going to church. And when a Christian church falls into disrepair, it would be a pious act for Muslims to help the Christians rebuild it. And every Muslim vows to defend with force of arms, if necessary, Christians until the end of time. Because the Muslims essentially looked at Christians or the essential Christians as monks. This was because in those communities, in the Arabian area that were Christian, very often they had grown up around monasteries. So the Christian community, even though it became a village or a settlement or even a city, essentially they were an extension of the monasteries where the abbot was like the mayor, So they understood, and they said, and never tax monastics. These are all, and we have proved that these are the actual words of the prophet. But it didn't last, did it? Which is understandable because, time is always going downhill. But it's amazing that this knowledge of what the covenants were and what the original will of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was, are emerging now. This knowledge emerged exactly when ISIS was starting to grow up. And these covenants say in no uncertain terms that anyone who does what ISIS and Al Qaeda do has earned the curse of Allah and his prophet. And we prove these are the real words of Muhammad. So this is interesting. How this works in a world like this, I don't know. But it had to have come to the surface now for a reason.
Mhm. Yeah, that brings up a lot of interesting points, and because that obviously you're coming from the perennialist sort of view on things, and you have been very vocal about not intermingling the traditions
Yeah,
and keeping them separate but equal, for lack of a better phrase.
Well, it's hard to do that because, there is a real, like ecumenism, that's like, as I said, the prophet wanted to create a federation of the peoples of the book. Yet in our time, that immediately becomes co-opted by the globalists for their horrible one world religion, which will pretty much be the regime of Antichrist. So how does this work? It's really a tightrope, I mean, this kind of knowledge of the correspondence between the religions, I don't know. You don't know where to place it. It came up for a purpose, but it's still an enigma and it's a danger,
Mhm.
So
And you go into that. Is your most recent book, was The Way Forward for Perennialism? Was that the most recent one that came out?
well, actually, yeah, see what happened there was one of Frithjof Schuon's followers, a lawyer, threatened to sue me and my publisher if we didn't withdraw it from publication.
Oh wow. Yeah, I
Yeah,
noticed it. I noticed it wasn't on
yeah.
your Amazon page anymore.
No, it's not there. So, but what I'm doing, that's one of the things I'm doing right now. I'm rewriting that. I'm glad he did that because there were certain scandals around Frithjof Schuon, who was the head of the Perennialist Traditionalist School until his death, pretty much in the English speaking world until his death in, I guess, 1998. And uh, these scandals are pretty well known, but the lawyer in question just hopes that if he can quash all, uh, you know, record of them on the internet or in books or anywhere else, then, you know, by historical attrition, the memory of them will be forgotten, and then suddenly there will be a Frithjof Schuon with a clean personality, I mean, a clean reputation. I don't think that's going to happen. But in any case, I'm glad he did that because uh, he forced me to go into Schuon's published writings. And Schuon is an amazing situation because he's one of the greatest expositors of metaphysics and comparative religion that we've had ever, and probably, certainly in the 20th century. um, and yet, there is a sort of hidden strand of counter initiation in his writings, which I believe he was not aware of. I think he came up with, a truth that in the darkness of our times cannot be expressed without being perverted. But it has to be expressed. It's very strange. That level of truth has to be expressed, but Satan is going to get a hold of part of it and turn it to evil. And so the expression of that metaphysical truth becomes an eschatological sign. It becomes an element of judgment. You know, people have tried. I've tried to say, well, you know, Schuon was a great metaphysician, and we just soft pedaled the dark part. No, and then you say, he was all evil. He was a subversive agent of the counter initiation. Reject him, and I can't do that either. He's right in the middle, which is just, you know, it's maddening, but it's true, I think. And if you can really see the truth in him and yet read him critically and understand where, you know, he was attacked and wounded by the Princeps Huius Mundi, you know, the prince of this world, and part of his doctrine was turned toward the dark side. If you can see that, which it's hard, you know, you don't like to see that, you know, but if you can see that, you learn something about what we're up against in these apocalyptic times, you know, and perhaps it's almost like an inoculation against the poison of the Antichrist.
What are some of the things in his writings that you would consider counter-initiatory?
Oh, you know, he would say so many great things on so many levels, and then he suddenly says, well, error implies a privation of the intellect, whereas sin does not imply a privation of the will. What? If sin isn't a weakening of the will, I don't know what it is. You know, if the will is turned in a false direction, it has to be weak first to make that choice, and the more the will follows sin, the weaker it gets. You know, like any addiction. That's so obvious. I mean, it's a kindergarten level understanding of spirituality that he forgot in his incredible elevated metaphysics. You know, he has a few other places like that. You know, so I think I don't think he some people would say, well, you know, he was a subversive. He was really an agent of the counter initiation. I don't think so. I think that he was so intelligent that it's hard for us to realize that some of the times he didn't know what the hell he was saying. He was like channeling it, you know, it was coming through his genius. And he believed, I think, that you know, there's this great proverb, you know, modern day proverb, which says, don't believe everything you think, you know, which is a warning to paranoids everywhere, and we're all paranoids these days. Don't believe everything you think. He believed everything he thought because he knew he was a genius. But sometimes he was wrong and he couldn't see it. You know, that's what happened. He was deceived by the powers of darkness. He didn't throw in his lot with the powers of darkness. He didn't follow them, but they did deceive him. You know, and that's what and so if you look at how that happened to him, you can see how that could happen to anybody these days. And it's an important thing to see.
Wow. Yeah, and I think I remember reading in that book that, I mean, we already touched on the perennialist idea that there's or maybe we didn't even really touch on it that much, but there's the transcendent unity that seems to inform what you would call divine revelations, and then but on this plane of manifestation they all have to be kept separate without mixing their forms.
Yeah.
And I think that you kind of noted that at least towards the end of his life he wasn't very consistent with that idea.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was this teaching that came to me through all the people I knew in the traditionalist school, and there were certain things like that which it goes without saying. We don't believe in syncretism, you know, and there were a number of things I said, well, this is great. This is what the traditionalists teach. But then you look into Schuon and you say, but he didn't really teach that. You know, Titus Burckhardt, for example, one of his major followers, did teach that. And he drew his teachings from Schuon's teachings. And yet he was more consistent and clear in what the boundaries were, whereas Schuon was going off in all directions because he was like a poet, you know, which, excuse me, because that's one of the things I've been in the past. So I understand the problem, you know. He was, you know, getting inspirations from here and here and here, and they weren't always from a pure source. So,
Yeah, well, it's a lot to chew on, and I want to respect your time, but thanks again so much for sitting down with us. Um, where can people find your work?
well, it's all on Amazon. That's the best place to go.
All right. Yeah. Search Charles Upton on Amazon. You also have, forgive me, I don't know if you want to put this out there, but you also have a GoFundMe.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind putting out there because, recently I turned up with an early case of colon cancer, and what I'm doing is treating that through we have a world-class integrative medicine doctor here near Lexington, Kentucky, where I live, and he's got me on this regime of millions of different herbs and supplements, which are kind of expensive. So, I need some help in following that regime, and I've also got other things financially, I'm not in great shape. So, well, go fund me, Charles Upton, ought to get you there. And if there's any place, I don't know what your format is like, but I can send you the link
Yeah, we'll put it in the description.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right. Okay. So, well, that would be very helpful because, and it's been heavy to, accepting help. This is, self-will says I can do it myself, and submission to God's will says I'm in need. And so admitting your need to other human beings is maybe helps you admit that you're in absolute need of God, and you wouldn't even exist without him. You couldn't take the next breath without him. And that turning to help from human beings is a way of turning to God, just like confessing your sin to another mere human being is like confessing it to God. It's what sort of makes it real. Well,
Yeah, we'll definitely put those links in the description. And yeah, I wish you well with all of those struggles. And
yeah, well, it just brings everything more to a point,
Mhm.
and the things which are a waste of time and energy just tend to go up in smoke, which is
Mhm.
good. So,
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, man. This has been great.
yeah, well, it has been great, and well, and if you want to do it again sometime, get back to me. Glad
It'd be
to.
great. That'd be
Yeah,
awesome,
that
man.
sounds good. Yeah, I guess we'll end this session here. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. God bless.
Right. God bless you.